it? Let me give you one piece of advice. Be honest. He knows more than you can imagine.
At last. Welcome, Neo. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus.
It's an honor to meet you.
No. The honor is mine. Please, come, sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No,
Why not?
because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Yeah, in fact, I almost pulled that at the last minute because some of us in here are science fiction geeks and some of us aren't, and that's okay. Certainly can get to heaven without enjoying the Matrix. We're going to come back to the Matrix in a little bit, and then hopefully it all will be made clear at that point. But in the interim, I've got a lot of ground I want to cover. Take your Bibles, turn to John chapter 11. And this, unlike a lot of sermons, I'm not going to just grab a tiny little piece of John 11 and break that out. We're going to try to get the majority of John 11. So, but I had a couple of intro things that I wanted to do quickly. One of them is the fact that one of our problems, one of the problems that John Dennis faces is a problem that Jesus levels at Peter in the very famous event where Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ. You guys remember that in Mark chapter 8? And it begins with Jesus saying, John Dennis is paraphrased, but they're going to take me and they're going to rough me up and then they're going to kill me. And Peter, I love this concept. Peter rebukes Jesus and says the three stupidest words anybody has ever said. He says, "Not so, Lord," right? Or in modern vernacular, "You're wrong, Jesus," right? And then Jesus turns to the disciples. I love this. He turns to the disciples, but he talks to Peter. And I'm not sure what that is about. I don't know why. And Mark, who is not typically a very descriptive writer, just says, he turns to the disciples, but he addresses Peter, and he says, among other things, you're not, the Greek says, you don't savor God's interests, but man's. And one of the more modern translations, and I can't remember which one it was, but I love the way that they translated that. The way that one of the modern translations translated that statement is, you're not thinking like a spiritual person, you're thinking like a human being. And I just love that, because therein lies John Dennis's, one of John Dennis's biggest problems. I don't savor the things that are of God or of God's interests. I savor the things that are of man's interest. I think like a human being and not like a spiritual person. And by the way, Paul's going to talk about those spiritual people and the non-spiritual people in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and I don't have time to unpack it, but he calls the spiritual person a pneumatikos. The pneuma is the spirit, and kos just is a person who is driven by. So a pneumatikos, and then he also talks about the psychikos. And the psyche is the mind, the will, and we're going to talk about all of those just briefly. And most of you who've been around me for a while have heard me talk about this ad nauseum. So I'm just going to briefly touch on those, but some definitions there on the screen. Our Bible has the word life, but it could be one of three different Greek words. And I know you don't have to be a Greek major to get to heaven, but this is so important, the differentiation here. And I wish that there was some way that translation could happen that it would reflect these. I started to say nuance. It really isn't nuance. It is such a significant concept that's being discussed here. There are three different words in the Greek for life. One of them is the word bios or bios. We get our word biology from that. One of them is the word soul, psyche. That's your thoughts, your intents, your motives, your subconscious, all of the stuff that the word psychology encompasses. And I wish I had time to unpack some of those things. But by the way, when it says, for instance, when Jesus says, and Andrew did the piece just a few weeks ago on, was it last week? On the shepherd. And did a fantastic job. But this statement is made, Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd and I lay down my life for the sheep. So there are three words, bios, suke, and zoe. Zoe is generally a statement about the quality of your existence. So when Jesus says in John 10, I came to give them life and to give it more abundantly, he's talking about the quality. He's not just talking about existing, he's talking about really living, which, that's a significant thing, that distinction. But in John 10, or is it 11? It's 11. I messed up there. But lays down his life for the sheep. What word is he using there, do you suppose? Huh? Bios. Well, that would have been my guess. Bios. But it's actually not. It's the word suke. I lay down my suke because that's where my will. See, this is so important. That's where my will lives. That's where what I think lives. That's where all of those blinders and things that keep me from seeing truth, all of that exists in the suke. So Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd and I lay down not my bios for the sheep, not my zoe for the sheep, but I lay down my suke for the sheep. And in order for me to accomplish what's been laid, that's set out for me in my spiritual walk, I've got to lay down my suke. And that, by the way, is something I talked about 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Paul really drills down deep into that concept in 1 Corinthians 1 and 1 Corinthians 2. Jesus will say, I lay down no greater love than this, that a man lays down his life for his friends. That's the same word, suke there. In John 12, verse 25, he says, if you love your life, you'll lose it. And he's talking about this idea of the suke. If I'm trying to hold on to me, don't step on my script, man. I want to do my thing. I want this to be about me. If you hold on to that, you're going to lose it. But Jesus says, if you let go of that, you get it back. It's kind of cool. And then there's that word zoe, which I wish I had time to really drill down into, but almost every place in the New Testament where the word zoe is used, or the derivative of that word is used, it has to do with the quality of your existence. And we're talking about that, by the way, in our Bible class with the kids, and it's just such a great discussion. Man, we are just... what does it take to really thrive, to really live, to live on a level above circumstance and happening and all of that kind of thing. So, now, this is such another key point that I wish I had time to drill down into, but I can't. When the Bible talks about eternal life, what do you immediately think about? Well, most of us who grew up in church, we just think about eternal life is going to heaven and never dying. But the truth of the matter is, everybody on the planet who has ever lived is going to live forever, right? They're going to exist forever and ever and ever. But the word that's used, by the way, for eternal is the word aeon in the Greek. We get our word eon from it. It just means long time, which is the best that human language can do to talk about what happens after this period on this planet. But what eternal zoe, aeon zoe is getting to have an existence that's the very best that can be experienced by a human right here, right now, and you get to keep it throughout eternity, forever and ever and ever. So, there you go. So, all of that, I was going to talk about the Greek and Hebrew concept of resurrection, but I don't have time. And I was also going to say, typically when I start talking about resurrection, if I stepped up here and I was going to talk about how to have a better relationship with your spouse, or, how to, navigate complicated culture that we live in or whatever, people start taking notes. But as soon as I start talking about resurrection, people's eyes start to kind of glaze over. And there's a reason for that. It's just such a concept that is so far outside of our experience that we don't really have any hooks to even hang that stuff on, right? So I'm going to try to provide some of that for you this morning in the next few minutes. So some things that we're going to look for in the read through John chapter 11, hyperlinks to Jesus' sacrifice and resurrection. And John is so good at these subliminals. And so I just want to kind of underscore a couple of things. Yeah. So this idea of Jesus laying down his life. So we're talking, and I'm going to read through John 11 with you, but I'm going to challenge you to go back through, because John is so good at hiding these Easter eggs all over the place. And so, the idea of Jesus laying down his life, which you wouldn't think you'd find in a discussion on the resurrection of Lazarus, but the focus on his burial shroud, on Lazarus' burial shroud, and how it kind of points forward to Jesus and his burial shroud. And in fact, if you recall, John is explicit about when the disciples come to the tomb and they're peering in, and Peter and John had the race, to see who could get there first. When they get to the tomb and they're looking in, it says that they see the burial shroud, and then John goes into great detail about how it's all wound up, and there's a reason for that, but I don't have time to go into that. Rolling away the stone, all of these are hyperlinks pointing to the crucifixion of Jesus. And it's so cool the way John does that. Crying out in a loud voice, which only happens a couple other times in the Gospel of John, but two of them are on the cross, right? So he's gonna cry out with a loud voice in John chapter 11. Then some life lessons that I'd like for you to take away. First one is that this vending machine God that the prosperity gospel guys, the prosperity gospel guys are constantly touting this idea that, that God is this vending machine, and you drop in, your contribution, and then out of this vending machine God comes all of these wonderful blessings. And the vending machine God that the prosperity gospel gurus present is an idol. It's an idol. God isn't in the business of granting wishes. He's just not. He is in the business of transforming this world and the people who live in it. And that transformation process is extremely expensive. Ask Jesus. And it's extremely painful on occasion. And those of us who have been molded and shaped by him over the years can point back to times when we thought, oh man, what is he doing? I mean, he's just about to break me in half. And the important thing is, exactly. He's trying to break you so that he can heal you. And did you guys... I had an event. I'll just do it this way real quickly. I had an event many years ago where I was working on this chessboard. My mom and I were working on a chessboard together, ceramics. And I'd been working on this thing forever. And it's a large board. And I would pick it up to turn it over, and I was going to do some, and I'd done that 2 or 3 times. And I picked it up before it was fired. I picked it up and it broke. And so about the 3rd time that happened, I did something really stupid, but very much in my nature. It broke, and I laid it down on the table, and then I said, "Ah!" and I hit it. Well, it didn't it didn't dawn on me until a couple of days later. I really did some damage to that finger. Because after the numbness wore off, it really hurt. And I kept thinking, well, it'll go away and it'll go away. So finally, after about a week and a half or 2 weeks, it still didn't go away. So I went to see the doctor. And he x-rayed it, and he said, yep, it's broken. And I said, cool, what can we do about that? And he said, can't do anything about it now. If you'd have come in earlier, we could have done something about it. I said, you can't do anything about it? He said, well, I can break it again. And I said, yeah, it's all right then. I'll just deal with it. So God is going to have to break you to heal you. It's just a fact. What you experience, the second life lesson I want to get, what you experience in everyday life, in this day-to-day living, is not reality. This is a mirage, and it's going to evaporate one day. And when that happens, you and I are going to step into reality. But there's this thing that happens consistently, and John's probably the best at it, but it happens in the other Gospels too, where Jesus occasionally peels back that veil and lets us look into what reality really is. Like what's going to happen here in John 11. God's goal for you is forever Zoe. It's this eternal quality of existence. And this is an odd question, but I'm right here. Does he have your permission to proceed? So that takes some trust. You have to say, okay, I want this Zoe thing that you're offering. And then he says, okay, but in order for that to happen, I need carte blanche. I want to do what I need to do in order to get you to that place where you have this eternal Zoe. So there's so many places in the Gospel of John where John does this thing where, and I'm going to kind of combine these two. I wanted to talk a little bit more about them, but just for time's sake, I'll hurry up. Where John kind of, he's doing the narrative, and then he stops, and he kind of leans in and whispers to us, like it's. So Lizzie will get this, the idea of breaking the fourth wall. Do you guys know what that means? In actor parlance, it means like if you're looking at a stage and you've got, the three walls, well, there's an invisible fourth wall, and the actors are supposed to be completely ignoring the audience. And so they're not interacting with the audience at all. But occasionally, especially in humor, there'll be... like Ferris Bueller's Day Off was one that comes to my mind, where Ferris is doing his thing, and then he stops and looks at the camera and talks to you, right? Well, these things are all over the place in the Gospel of John, where John and the other disciples are involved in this, and then they stop, or John stops, and he breaks the fourth wall, and he looks at you and he says, "Here's really what's going on." And they're all over the place in chapter 11. Okay, real quick. I'm not going to have time to do the whole 11, but I'll grab the high points and then do a quick conclusion and send you home. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Here's one of those. This Mary was... whose brother Lazarus lay sick. He's kind of giving you something that... And by the way, this is interesting. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. That event actually hasn't even happened yet in John's narrative. So he's, not only has he broken the fourth wall, but he's actually jumped forward in time, which I think is really cool. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And when he heard this, Jesus said, the sickness will not end in death. What a interesting way of putting it. He doesn't say Lazarus isn't going to die. He says it will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus, now watch this. This is so clever what John does here. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard, now watch, you ought to underline that word so. He loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was. What? Why? I mean, you know, if he really loved them, he would have dropped everything and run to them, right? I just think that is such a strange transition. He loved them, so he stayed where he was. This is the way God works. Sometimes when you're going through the ringer and you say, I want out now, God loves you, so he stays where he's at. Well, I thought, you know, the prosperity gospel guy said, if I put enough money in the collection plate and come to church every Sunday, he'll give me what I want. Nope, I'm going to give you what you need. And even more importantly, I'm going to give you what the kingdom needs. That's the big picture, that Jesus gets glorified. Kind of isn't out, you know, what about you? So when he heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to the disciples, let us go back to Judea. And the disciples, verse 8, Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? So this is one of those things. Jesus is laying down his life for Lazarus. He knows that going into Judea is dangerous, and he's willing to go anyway. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? Let's skip that spot. Skip down to verse 11. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, I love this. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him. This is one of those events where John tells a story, and you and I are in on the joke, right? But the disciples aren't. So he says, you know, Lazarus is asleep, and I'm going to go wake him. It's like, if you knew who was talking to you, you'd ask him for living water, and the gal says, well, you don't have a bucket. Well, these are all over the Gospel of John, and this one, I'm going to wake Lazarus, and his disciples reply, well, Lord, if he's asleep, he'll get better. That's John's way of saying, he's really not talking about sleep. Jesus, and John just actually does that. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, okay, Lazarus is dead, guys. And for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe, but let us go to him. And then, of course, Thomas being, you know, that macho guy, well, come on, guys, let's go so we can die with him. I love that. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come out to pay their respects. Let's skip down to verse 21. Lord, Martha comes out to meet Jesus. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Boy, there's faith. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, well, I know that, you know, in the last day. Down to verse 25. Jesus said, I can give you resurrection and life. Is that what yours says? You guys, some of you are following, looked up at me like, what? Yeah, he didn't say, I can give you resurrection, I can give you life. He said, I am. the resurrection and the life. No other prophet ever on the planet. I don't have any tangible evidence to this, but I'm guessing. I mean, what just an incredible statement. And by the way, resurrection is the Greek word for stand up. I love that. But the word life here is that word zoe. It's not bios. He's not going to resurrect Lazarus to just be a zombie. He's going to resurrect Lazarus to really thrive, right? Resurrection and life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. The Greek word apophane. The word apo means away, far away. Phane is one of the words for death. It means you won't waste away. It's just the opposite of zoe. It's just wasting away. Do you believe this? And she says, yes, Lord. I believe that you are Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into this world. And after she said this, she went back and called her sister. I'm going to skip down. Little conversations going back and forth, but let's skip down to verse. And one of probably my favorite verse is in verse 35. Now let's start 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved. Just love that. Is God moved? Is Jesus moved by your suffering? Yes. Yeah. Deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have they laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then the old cowboys in my grandpa's church in McAdoo, Texas, they used to have the scoreboard up there that said how many people they had on Sunday and how much money they collected and all that. So they also had one that said daily Bible readers, and the old cowboys, we'd have that meeting, and I got to go sometimes, like we do here, and the old cowboys would say, yeah, I read Jesus wept for 7 days in a row, so they were daily Bible readers. But far from being just an easy way to get your star, your name with a star beside it for daily Bible reading, Jesus wept is such a powerful statement. Jehovah God Almighty in human flesh, and he is weeping. Oh man. So they go to the tomb, and Jesus says, roll away the stone. Hyperlink to his own resurrection. And what a great statement. The next one, Martha says, but Lord, I mean, isn't that so human? I mean, we're about to see one of the paramount miracles in the entire Bible, and one of the participants is saying, yeah, but if we do that, it's going to stink, right? It's just, I love the irony of it. So they took away the stone, verse 41. And Jesus, with a loud voice, 43, Lazarus. Oh, man. You know why he said Lazarus, right? You know why he didn't just say, come forth? I'm trying to remember the name of the old black preacher. Oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. Anyway, he would say on this passage that Jesus specified Lazarus because if he didn't, he would have emptied all the tombs, he said. That's awesome. Okay, he comes out wrapped mummy style, and John focuses on that. So, last slide, and I'm done. I know you guys have been very patient. Each day when you begin the day, you begin with the option of the blue pill or the red pill that we were looking at this morning. The blue pill lets you remain in blissful ignorance, walking through the illusion that this world is real. And that's living like the sukekas, right? This world is not real. The stuff that seems so tangible, it's just an illusion. And occasionally Jesus pulls back the veil and lets us peek in. Jesus offers, so to speak, the red pill, tearing the veil from top to bottom and allowing you to see reality. That's the pneumatikos that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 2. The physical life is a mist, it's a vapor, it's a mirage, and it's going to end. It just is. It is not easy, it's difficult, but the one who invented resurrection, right? The one who invented life, the one who invented resurrection, strike that, is the resurrection, is trying so hard to speak truth past your defenses and say, this stuff right here isn't real. We're all going to die, but that's not the end. Eternity is my problem, and eternity is your problem. We're all going to live forever and ever. Eternity is the reality. This whole temporal thing where we're watching clocks and all of that, this is all an illusion. But the reality is we all are eternal. The question is, this is a big question. What is the quality of your eternity going to be? Eternity without God, eternity without relationships, eternity in that mode would be hell. Eternity with God, and the truth of the matter is, I don't want to, disappoint you, but when you get to heaven, I just don't think you're going to find streets of gold and pearly gates. I just don't think that's going to be there. I think what you get out of this is God. I think what you get out of this is Jesus. I think what you get out of this is this group of people right here. And this is enough. That'll do, right? So if there's anything you need help with to get you on the right track, man, don't leave today without talking to somebody. We'd love to help in one way or another. Alrighty, step up here, Jim. Sorry I went so long.